The marble floors of the mansion were cold, but not nearly as cold as the silence in the room. Richard, a man who could buy entire companies with a signature, stood trembling, staring at the empty wheelchair in the corner. His daughter, once the world's most promising ballerina, lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling with eyes that had forgotten how to dream. The most expensive doctors in London had packed their bags and left, offering nothing but apologies. All hope was gone. Richard buried his face in his hands, ready to give up until a soft, hesitant voice spoke from the doorway. It was not a doctor, but a man in a worn coat holding a child's hand. He stepped forward and whispered the 3 words that would change everything. "I will help her." The estate sat on the edge of the countryside, a sprawling masterpiece of Victorian architecture. That felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and despair. Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, was a man accustomed to fixing problems throughout his life. There was no obstacle that capital, influence, or sheer force of will could not overcome. But this was different. This was Elara. 6 months ago, Elara had been the jewel of the Royal Ballet School. She moved with a grace that made audiences hold their breath, her body a conduit for music and emotion. Then came the car accident. It was a rainy Tuesday, a slick road, and a moment of impact that shattered her spine and her future simultaneously. The diagnosis was paralysis from the waist down. While the physical damage was catastrophic, the psychological toll was the true tragedy. Elara had not just lost the use of her legs. She had lost her identity. She refused to speak, refused to eat, and spent her days staring out the window at the gray English sky. A prisoner in her own body. Richard had summoned specialists from Switzerland, neurologists from America, and therapists from the finest clinics in the world. They all came with innovative machines and confident smiles, and they all left defeated by Elara's absolute refusal to engage. She was fading away, becoming a ghost in the high-ceilinged room. On this particular Tuesday, Richard was interviewing candidates for a new live-in caretaker position. The agency had sent highly qualified nurses with stiff uniforms and stiffer upper lips. Richard dismissed them one by one. They were too clinical, too cold. They looked at Elara and saw a patient, a broken object to be managed. Then came Liam. He was late, slightly out of breath, and unlike the others, he had a little girl hiding behind his leg. Liam was not wearing a crisp uniform. He wore a simple jumper and corduroys that had seen better days. He was a single father who had lost his wife years ago and had been working as a private physiotherapist to make ends meet for his daughter, Maya. The agency had sent him as a last resort, warning Richard that Liam was unconventional. When Liam walked into Elara's room, he did not look at the charts at the foot of the bed. He did not look at the expensive equipment gathering dust in the corner. He looked directly at Elara's face. He saw the anger burning beneath the apathy. He saw the dancer who was screaming silently. Richard watched, exhausted. "Mr. Wright," Richard said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "I need someone who can handle difficult cases. My daughter has rejected the best medical minds in the world. Why should I hire you?" Liam looked down at his own daughter, Maya, who was clutching a small, battered teddy bear, then looked back at the CEO. "Because, sir," Liam said softly, "the other doctors tried to fix her legs. I want to remind her why she would want to use them again." Elara did not turn her head, but for the first time in months, her fingers twitched against the bedsheet. It was a microscopic reaction, but Liam saw it. He didn't promise miracles. He didn't promise she would dance Swan Lake again. He simply whispered that he would help her find herself. Desperate and out of options, Richard hired him on the spot, unaware that he had just invited a storm of emotion into his quiet, broken home. The first week was a disaster. Elara was not merely difficult. She was hostile. She treated Liam like a piece of furniture, refusing to acknowledge his presence. When he tried to assist her into the wheelchair for a change of scenery, she went dead weight, making the task nearly impossible. When he brought her meals, she swiped the tray onto the floor, the crash of porcelain echoing through the large house. Richard watched these interactions from the doorway, his heart sinking. He pulled Liam aside on the 4th day. "This isn't working, Liam. She hates you. Perhaps it is time to admit defeat." "She doesn't hate me, Richard," Liam said, his voice calm and steady. "She hates the situation. She hates that she needs help. If she is throwing plates, it means she still has fire in her. I would be more worried if she did nothing at all. Liam changed his strategy. He stopped trying to be a therapist and started being a nuisance. He brought Maya with him. The 7-year-old girl was oblivious to the tension. She would sit on the floor of Elara's room, coloring in her books, humming loudly, and occasionally asking Elara questions that went unanswered. "I like your shoes," Maya said one afternoon, pointing to the ballet slippers hanging on the wall as a sad memorial. "My daddy says you were a princess." Elara's jaw tightened. She turned her head sharply. "I am not a princess. I am a cripple. Tell your father to stop lying to you." It was the first sentence she had spoken in weeks. Liam, standing by the window, didn't flinch. "I didn't lie, Elara. You were a dancer. That doesn't just go away because you are sitting down." "Get out," she hissed. "No," Liam replied simply. He walked over to a dusty record player in the corner of the room. It had been silent since the accident. He placed a needle on the vinyl. Tchaikovsky. The room filled with the swelling, emotive strings of the Waltz of the Flowers. "Turn it off," Elara screamed, covering her ears. The music was torture. It was a reminder of everything she had lost. Every movement she could no longer execute. Every stage she would never grace. "Listen to the rhythm, Elara," Liam commanded, his voice cutting through her panic. He didn't turn it off. Instead, he sat in the chair, next to her bed, and began tapping, his hand on his knee in time with the music. Maya copied him. Elara sobbed, her body shaking with grief and rage. But Liam did not comfort her with hollow words. He sat with her in the storm. He let the music play until the record finished. When silence returned, the air felt different. The pressure valve had been released. "You are cruel," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Life is cruel," Liam agreed gently, handing her a glass of water. "But the music is still beautiful. You can either close your ears and rot in this bed, or you can listen and find a new way to move." That afternoon marked the shift. It was not a magical recovery, but it was an engagement. Elara began to watch Liam. She watched how he interacted with Maya, with a patience that seemed infinite. She started to tolerate his presence. Then his touch as he began the painful process of massaging her atrophied muscles. The war was far from over, but the first line of defense had been breached. Winter turned to spring, and the atmosphere in the Sterling mansion began to thaw. Liam's unconventional therapy was in full swing. He didn't keep Elara in the sterile home gym filled with chrome equipment. Instead, he took her to the greenhouse. "Nature heals," Liam insisted when Richard questioned why his daughter was digging in the soil with her hands. "She needs to feel life growing. She needs to get her hands dirty." One afternoon, under the glass roof of the conservatory, with rain hammering against the panes, Liam challenged, "Elara." He placed a small radio on the potting bench and played a fast-paced jazz track. "I can't dance to this," Elara said, looking at her wheelchair with her usual bitterness. "I didn't ask you to stand," Liam said, rolling up his sleeves. "Dancing isn't just legs, Elara. It's the core. It's the arms. It's the expression. Show me you are still a dancer." He stood in front of her and held out his hands. Hesitantly, she took them. He began to move her arms, guiding her upper body in swaying motions. At first she was stiff, resisting the movement. But as the brass instruments flared in the song, muscle memory kicked in. Her neck elongated, her chin lifted, and her arms began to flow with a grace that had been dormant for too long. Maya was clapping in the corner, shouting, "Go, Elara, go!" For a fleeting moment, Elara forgot the chair. She forgot the paralysis. She threw her head back and laughed, a genuine, bell-like sound that Richard, who had been watching from the French doors, hadn't heard in a year. Tears streamed down the CEO's face as he watched his daughter's eyes light up with a spark of her old self. However, the turning point was not just about happiness. It was about trust. A few weeks later, Liam decided it was time to try the parallel bars. It was the terrifying step of attempting to support her own weight. Elara gripped the bars, her knuckles white. "I can't, I'm too heavy. My legs are dead wood." "Your arms are iron," Liam countered, standing close behind her, his hands hovering at her waist but not holding her. "Trust yourself. If you fall, I catch you. I promise." She pushed. Her triceps trembled, shaking violently. She grit her teeth, sweat beading on her forehead. She lifted herself, her feet dragging slightly, but she was upright. For 3 seconds she stood. Then her left arm gave way. She collapsed backward. But she didn't hit the ground. Liam's arms were there instantly, scooping her up before she could suffer any impact. He held her close, her face buried in his chest as she gasped for breath. "I failed," she sobbed into his shirt. "I fell." "You stood," Liam corrected her firmly, holding her tight. "You stood for 3 seconds. Next week it will be 5, then 10. You didn't fail, Elara, you just started." In that embrace, something shifted between them. It wasn't just patient and therapist anymore. She realized that this man, with his quiet strength and his sad eyes, was the only one who truly believed in her. He wasn't fixing a machine. He was carrying a soul until it was strong enough to fly. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his, and saw a reflection of her own pain and her own hope. Just as momentum was building, the fragile progress shattered. Richard had arranged for a small gathering of potential investors at the mansion. He wanted to show off Elara's progress, a proud father eager to display the miracle. He pressured Elara to attend, to sit in her chair and greet people. Elara was terrified. She hadn't seen anyone from her old life since the accident. Liam advised against it, sensing she wasn't ready for the public eye. But Richard insisted. "She needs to rejoin society," Richard argued. The evening was going reasonably well, until a former rival from the ballet academy, a young woman named Sophie, approached Elara. Sophie was now the lead soloist, the role Elara was meant to have. "It's so brave of you to be here," Sophie said, her voice dripping with unintentional condescension. "We all talk about you. It's just such a tragedy to think you were the best of us." The pity was worse than hatred. Elara felt the walls closing in, the music, the chatter, the clinking of champagne glasses. It all became a deafening roar. She spun her wheelchair around, desperate to escape, but in her panic, she misjudged the corner of a heavy rug. The wheel caught. The chair tipped. Elara crashed onto the marble floor in the middle of the crowded hall. The room went silent. She lay there, legs twisted at an awkward angle, unable to get up, exposed and humiliated. Richard froze, mortified, but Liam was there in a heartbeat. He didn't make a scene. He didn't apologize to the guests. He knelt down, blocked the view of the staring crowd with his body, and spoke softly to her. "Look at me, Elara, just me. Ignore them." He lifted her into his arms, carrying her out of the room with a dignity that silenced the guests. Back in her room, the fallout was catastrophic. Elara was hysterical. She threw a vase against the wall, screaming at Liam. "It's all a lie. I'm never going to be normal. I'm a freak. Why did you make me believe I could do this?" Richard entered the room, his face red with embarrassment and anger. He turned on Liam. "This was a mistake. You filled her head with false hope. Look at her. She's worse than before. You're fired. Get your things and get out." Elara stopped screaming. The room fell into a deadly silence. Liam looked at Richard, then at Elara. He didn't argue. He didn't beg for his job. He walked over to Elara, knelt down so he was eye level with her, and took her hand. "I will leave if you want me to," Liam said, his voice breaking slightly. "But before I go, you need to know why I took this job. My wife, she was in a chair too. After her accident, I gave up on her. I let the doctors handle it. I let her sink into the depression because I was too scared to push her. She died of an overdose because she felt she had no purpose." A tear tracked down Liam's cheek. "I promised myself I would never let that happen again. I see her in you, Elara. You have a fire she lost. You fell tonight, so what? You fall in ballet 1,000 times before you perfect a pirouette. If you want me to go, say the word. But if I stay, we fight. No more parties, just work." Elara looked at her father, who was stunned into silence by Liam's confession. She looked at Liam, the man who had just bared his soul to save hers. "Don't go," she whispered. She looked at her father. "Dad, if you send him away, I will never forgive you." Richard, humbled and ashamed of his pride, nodded slowly. He left the room, closing the door softly, leaving the two of them to begin the real healing. 6 months later, the Sterling Mansion was hosting the annual charity gala. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. There was no pressure on Elara to perform or to mingle as a prop, but she had a plan. She and Liam had worked in secret for weeks. The physiotherapy had evolved into choreography. Her legs were still weak, and she could not run or leap, but she had regained significant core control and partial sensation in her thighs. The grand ballroom was filled with London's elite. Richard stood at the podium, giving a speech about resilience. "We often think strength is about never breaking," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd to find Liam and Maya standing near the back. "But true strength is about how we put the pieces back together." The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the center of the dance floor. Liam walked out, dressed in a sharp tuxedo Richard had bought for him. He positioned a simple chair in the middle of the floor. Then, he went to the edge of the shadows and wheeled Elara out. She was dressed in a flowing silver gown that shimmered like water. The music began, not a classical ballet piece, but a contemporary emotive instrumental. Liam offered his hand. Elara took it. She didn't stay in the chair. With a grunt of effort that was audible over the music, she pulled herself up. The crowd gasped. She locked her knees, trembling but standing. Liam became her barre, her support. They moved together, a slow, intricate dance of balance and trust. He lifted her, spinning her through the air, her legs creating beautiful lines as the fabric of her dress swirled. When he set her down, she leaned her weight against him, and they swayed, her head resting on his shoulder. It wasn't a solo performance. It was a duet of survival. For the finale, Liam stepped back. He stood 3 feet away from her. Elara stood alone in the spotlight. She wavered. The room held its breath. She took one step, then another. It wasn't a graceful ballet walk. It was a human walk, raw and real. She reached Liam and he caught her just as her strength faded. The silence that followed lasted only a second before the room exploded. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar of admiration. People were weeping. Richard was sobbing openly on the stage. Maya ran onto the floor, hugging Elara's legs. Elara looked down at the little girl, then up at Liam. She didn't need to hear the applause. She saw the look in Liam's eyes, pure, unadulterated pride. Later that night, as the guests were leaving, Richard found Liam on the terrace. "I can never repay you," the billionaire said. "You gave me back my daughter." "She did the work," Liam smiled, watching Elara laugh with Maya inside. "I just reminded her of the music." Elara wasn't the dancer she used to be. She was something stronger. She was a woman who had broken and rebuilt herself. And as she looked through the glass at the single dad who had whispered hope into her darkness, she knew that her best dance was yet to come, not on a stage, but in the life they were now building together. Sometimes the medicine we need doesn't come in a bottle, and the help we need doesn't come from a checkbook. Elara had everything money could buy, but she was spiritually bankrupt until someone offered her empathy, patience, and genuine connection. It reminds us that even when we feel paralyzed by life's circumstances, having just one person who believes in us can be the difference between giving up and standing tall. Never underestimate the power of a whisper in a noisy world.